we're going to talk about I'm going to talk about the development of this thermal drone capacity at the School of Architecture. Now, back in actually it was late 2016, I was granted some URF funding to look at drones in humanitarian aid, and there were three parts to it. There was drone mapping, which turned into absolutely spectacular outcomes in terms of the drone mapping that we did with the United Nations up in Bangladesh, which they hadn't been able to do before, surprisingly. So that was rather spectacular during the 2017-2018 year. The third one was to look at building or mine access or penetration, and that was following on from Christchurch, where we had a lot of issues about going back into buildings in the post-disaster phases. I can remember well trying to get the whakapapa data for Ngāi Tahu out of their building, and even though all of us were signing documents saying that we understood the risks involved, we still couldn't get access into that building. And so things like the Basilica, where they did a sacrificial drone to send it in, we wanted to make sure that when the earthquake hit Wellington, that we were understood about how to get the drones into those buildings, but also out and what were the protocol for those for that sort of drone work. But what I want to talk about today is the third one, which was locating subsurface water. Now, in the humanitarian area, water is one of the key aspects, and so drones, rather than just being something that spectacularly provides photographs and videos, we're trying in all of this work here to use drones to do something beyond just that video and those great photographs. And in locating the subsurface water, it's really trying to find out where and if you're given a site in a humanitarian context, how can I find water? Now, most of the time we have to use quite sophisticated receptivity studies or seismic studies to try and figure out where that water is. Local folk normally have a feel or an understanding from the growth patterns that are in those areas, but being able to go into a fairly barren area and being able to find water is, and I'm talking about subsurface water, around about 5 meters down, so that you could dig wells, was the kind of thing that we're looking for. So we started out looking at various options and various ways to do this. Now, I'd been involved with drones for quite a while, and in fact, in 2010 we took one into the earthquake in Haiti, and we were able to drone up all of the valleys. These valleys had all the rubbish that collected, and every summer they'd flush out, and so there'd be a big torrent of rubbish, and so we had to go up through the valleys to map them to figure out where the retaining walls were going, and we did that with drones very successfully. That was back in 2010. And then we used them in Christchurch with the Christchurch earthquakes, used them in Afghanistan, where we were looking at a mapping of the housing and some of the housing designs. And from that 2014 experience, I'm probably one of the only drone, I don't want to use the word pilots, but one of the drone people who's ever flown a drone with a military drone overhead, which was not lost on the villager that I was sort of getting permission to fly over their village with, because we could hear the non-stealthy diesel drones that as they come across, you could hear them. Anyway, then back in the Philippines with Yolanda in 2015 and Vanuatu, and also in 2015. 2016, we took them into Kaikoura, trying to find some of the urupā that had collapsed down hillsides. And then the big one in 2017 with Bangladesh and the sort of complex emergency, trying to map the land that we're moving 1.1 million people into. So overall, currently I've got 746 log drone flights since I started making a log back in 2013. So for me, it was straight away going to be a drone sort of vehicle that I was going to use, partly because of this experience, but also because we have a choice between a fixed wing or rotary, basically whether it's a quad or helicopter versus whether it's a plane, sort of standard drone that we often think about or you often see, the military type drones. The fixed wing drones have a much longer range and a much longer time, whereas the quads and the rotary ones, quads and helicopters, tend to have they're very short in terms of time. But for a lot of the sites that we're doing, and if we manage them correctly, we can actually cover quite a large area, so that the area advantage of sort of fixed wing drones is not really there. And then why thermal cameras? Well, I thought rather than sort of talk about how thermal cameras measure different spectra outside of the light spectra, that I kind of show you. Now, behind the computer that you're watching me on is the wall of my work from home, which you can see there. There's nothing particularly unusual, except it's kind of a little bit messy, I guess. There's nothing particularly unusual about this wall until you start putting a thermal camera on it. Now, when you put a very low res thermal camera, this is the one that's on my phone, you can start to see that the studs and the diagonal stud in the wall behind us then becomes quite apparent, and you can see that FLIR overlap the kind of outline of the picture, but you can sort of also see, because it's not so accurate, that there is quite a large, well, there's discrepancies. The main theme of the picture is there, that there is studs and a diagonal bracing stud in the wall behind me. But when you get to something that's a bit more finer in terms of the pixels, this one's a FLIR View Pro camera, which is the one that we finally got. Long story, but another presentation on that one, I guess. But you can start to see that there's a lot more detail. So in that first one, that first thermal camera, it's a 80 by 60 Masterton sort of camera, and then in the second one, it's a 640 by 520 or 512, sorry, TAL 2 camera. So you can see that thermal cameras, firstly, they give us a lot of information about what's in things that we can't normally see or detect, and these are very small temperature gradients that we're measuring, up to 0.1 of a degree difference. So the cameras can pick up those small differences, and they give us quite a different take on what we're looking at, this wall at the back of my room, for instance. So they were the sort of, that was the sort of reasoning behind firstly using drones rather than fixed wings, but also the need to have thermal cameras, because when we were looking at trying to find water, we were trying to look at the temperature differentials across the ground. So obviously we needed quite an accurate camera, and that 640 by 512 camera that you see on your right was actually very difficult to obtain, because we have to sign special agreements not to take that into areas where it could be stolen or taken, because it has quite a high military value, because it's quite small. Now, I'm going to try something absolutely devastating now, and I'm going to try and stop the presentation and try and go back to where I am here, back to here in the room, because I just wanted to show you some of the stuff that we've got, just to give you an idea of what we're talking about as we go through. So to start off with, this is the drone we have. It's a beauty. It's a Matrice heavy lift drone, really large, really big, really quite scary. Looks very military, very tactical. And this is the drone that we started out using for our first sort of attempts at thermal droning. It had a few problems, and we'll talk about those later. Later on, we got a lot more compact down to this one, which is the Mavic Pro, a lovely workhorse drone, both of them by DJI. you know, they seem to be the maker of choice these days, I guess. But this Mavic was one that we were able to adopt and adapt by bolting or attaching a plate on the bottom like that, and then attaching the camera, that thermal camera that I showed you just before, this one here, attaching that to the drone underneath it. So I was pointing down, and so at the end of the day, that was the sort of drone that we ended up with, but I wanted to show you what it looked like, but also to show you the sort of size and scale of the sorts of things that we were working with. Now, I want to get back into showing you back to the presentation, because on the way, because I guess a lot of my work is application based. A lot of my research is application based. I came across, well, we came around into this issue with my own whanau up in Masterton, with our own urupā out at Te Ore in Masterton. And there's the urupā, there is the, and its location in Masterton, it's just east of Masterton on the way to Castle Point. The Mariah is up here. And what had happened with this urupā is that someone had gone and buried their relative in the what was considered the roadway, and so we couldn't actually get to the back of the urupā because of that. But we also knew that in that section in between there were bodies buried from the 1918 Spanish flu epidemic. During that time, it was a rush to get people into graves. They were dug hastily, and it's very similar to the scenes that we're seeing probably overseas. Was what happened back in 102 years now back in Masterton, but also all over the country. The Maori were badly impacted by the Spanish flu. So I think there's 11 times more fatalities with Maori than there were with non-Maori. So it took a real hit back in 1918, where we didn't have the lockdown provisions that we have today. It was just basically everyone would just have to look after themselves, and the result was a huge sort of impact. In fact, so huge that it was the numbers that you look at based on the numbers that they have. It was 4 times the Italian impact. So the impact on Maori back in 18 was 4 times what's happening now in COVID-19 in Italy. So it was a really bad situation. Now, the urupās are sort of, it's not really it's just a little side road off to the side down to the back. So I said to my whanau, and here's a sort of picture of it, from, courtesy of Google Earth. It's about as good as I can get, unfortunately. We'll talk a little bit about that. So this was the graveyard where all my relatives, my mum and fathers and brothers, are all buried here, and uncles and aunties are all buried here. And this is where I will also be buried one day when it comes my turn to depart. And so we put the thermal drone up with the big matrice, and we started to see some interesting anomalies. It was quite hard to get them. And I've spent hours dredging through all the video to sort of get the actual photographs, because it was quite tricky to get a thermal drone. You've got to remember, we're in the middle of the night, because we're anticipating that the temperatures would be only kind of ambient late in the evening, early morning. So at that time, we didn't really know what time to put the drone up. So this was like 2 a.m. in the morning. I'm in a cemetery with my relatives, and my wife Florence, and my good friend Francis Hubbard. And then we suddenly try to take the memory card out and ping, and we lose it somewhere in the cemetery. So it's not the greatest of things. And it was always a conversation stopper when people say, well, what did you do, Regan, over the weekend? I'd say, well, I was out looking for dead bodies. And we did find them, because when you look closely at these thermal pictures, you can see that there is an area there where the graves are showing up, and the thermal camera has been able to pick these up very neatly. So it seems that we actually were walking over at least 2 graves anyway with a road, but there are about eight graves there. There are about another 3 on the other side that we also picked up. We're not quite sure whether they were 1918 Spanish flu epidemic. But what's interesting, and we also found a stream going through there. You can sort of see that going through the colder, darker water in the stream part. Now, what's interesting is when we compare the numbers. So we had at least 8, potentially 11. According to the official numbers, the Maori deaths in Masterton County were 8 altogether. So we know straight away that the numbers that they had for the deaths were wrong. But even based on those numbers, we're talking about something like 11.4 times the non-Pākehā or non-Maori rate of death, and we're looking at 4 times the current COVID-19 rate of deaths. Now that was just on invitation from my whanau, but and we have been talking about extending this because many people have been asking me about whether we could use this thermal drone in other, similar circumstances throughout the Wairarapa where they had to hurriedly bury people. And, some of the research that we will be looking at now in this COVID-19 is the resilience and how people have responded to that Spanish flu epidemic 102 years ago, and what has actually happened. What paths have people taken? It's a little bit of a personal trip because I'm always, not to say embarrassed, is not the right word, but I can't speak Maori. And the heritage that I have, we came out of a strong need to, not to say beaten into us, but it was actually really pushed hard by our grandfather that we had to all learn English first, because that was the language we would earn in. And so that was one of the outcomes of that sort of Spanish flu in 1918. Now, poor Meredith said to me, "Oh, I hear you've been finding dead bodies down with your whanau." And I said, "Oh, yes, we have." And so he said, "Well, look, we've got this interesting issue up at Orakau Pa in Kihikihi, which is just outside Awamutu. Now, apparently back in 1864, there was what I understand was the last battle of the Waikato Wars. And they still weren't quite sure exactly where the Pa site was. As I understand it, the land was confiscated after the battle, and then then it was just given over to farming, and it's been farmed since that time. Although they do now have a understanding or treaty for this land with this Heritage New Zealand, but they're still, it's not quite clear where the 1864 Pa site was. Best estimates, show it's sort of, they think it's somewhere around about here, which means that this area here, we'd learned from our earlier ones with the urupā back in Te Ore Ore to actually map the area well before we actually go in. So we actually had the map. So we knew that this area in here would be an area of concern or interest where we could possibly we should be focusing on to try and check whether some of those assumptions were actually about where the Pa was were correct. Now, our first attempts weren't very good, and this is with the big matrice. We had the problems of trying to keep it stable and trying to get the camera pointed down, directly down, because it was moving too fast or too quickly. It was very difficult in the late at night again to try and get it exactly over things. We couldn't actually do the flight planning very well. But what we really noticed and what we picked up later on was that the grass in this area was much longer, and that we thought that might be why we didn't pick up any temperature differences on the ground. And so we waited till there'd been the grass had been harvested, and we had a second go at trying to find where that Orakau Pa might be on this site. Again, the same site, this time with the grass cut, and our second attempt. Now, in our second attempt, we started to get a lot more pattern. and you can sort of see here these sort of colour differentials between the two. So the darker ones are probably where you're getting water storage, and the lighter ones are where you're getting free drainage. It's flowing away from. So it does seem that there are some areas that if the Maori Trust were to excavate, this area through here would be a key area to start with. And we can actually outline and mark that area out if they wanted to, but this is the report that I still have to owe you, Paul, in terms of what do we do next. But it was quite interesting, and it was quite an eerie feeling. I remember when I was droning, particularly this site, I could almost feel the 300 Maori that died at the Pa or nearby, sort of tapping me on the shoulder when we were droning, trying to find them out in this area. So that was really quite stunning, I guess, in that sense, but quite yet to be proven. But we do know the temperature differentials, and we do know where the temperature areas are within that area, which has been farmed since 1864. Finally, more recently, together with our summer scholar team, we've been looking at the old wooden government building. By this time, we developed the drone from a big, bulky Matrice, which is a fabulous drone within itself, fabulous platform. You can put almost anything on it and it will take it up, down to our very lightweight Mavic, which we could control. We had great control over it. So we were quite comfortable when we came to look at the roof. The Heritage New Zealand had asked us to look at the condition of the roof, and one of the things we needed to know was the leaks. We did a whole lot of other studies, both inside and outside, and one of them was a thermal map of the roof area. Now remember, we're just across the road from Parliament, so I was expecting all sorts of issues from people with little things in the ear trying to have a talk to me about the meaning of life. But surprisingly, no, we never did the whole time. We just had to let the hospital helicopter know, Queen's Wharf helicopter know, and we were basically ready to fly. Although I deliberately stayed very low, around about 30 or 35 meters over the old wooden government building, so that we didn't get didn't raise suspicions. And it was quite interesting. So with this tool, we were able to pick up, as you can see, there's an early morning thermal run across the front part of the old wooden government building, that certainly the ridges were showing up as being areas that were warmer. These hot areas here, just the sun's just coming through and just breaking through onto the roof. So we picked up about that. We picked up about the areas around the chimneys. Now, these are not actually real chimneys. They were taken out as part of the seismic strengthening. But the flashings around all of the chimneys seem to have lifted up, and they are potentially a leak or weak point within the roof, together with the eaves, or sorry, at the top, and there are some other areas within some of the valleys where we've picked up leaks, which have also been shown up inside. So we've come quite a long way from late 2016. I still have to do the survey to try and find water for subsurface water. We've still got to do that work. We've got all the gear. We've just got to find the site and also find the time, which is what we're always fighting against, isn't it? And I chose this topic over some of the other ones that I wanted to do, mostly because, and this is the sort of take-home message that I really wanted to get to, was that the work that we've been doing, or have done, just touched on, I guess, up with my whanau up in the Wairarapa on the 1918 Spanish flu epidemic. I don't think they had pandemic in those days, epidemic. Even though we were impacted 11 times more than non-Maori and 4 times more than the COVID-19 Italian response, we came through. And I think that's a fabulous message for these times, is that we will come through this COVID-19. What's out the other side, we're still not quite sure yet. We're still having to work that out. it has had impacts on us, on my whanau, my Maori relatives, I guess, which we're still mapping and trying to understand how that resilience will take shape. Certainly, New Zealand will not be the same when we start potentially opening up, when the lockdown, the level 4 comes off in about a week's time, hopefully, all fingers crossed. And I thought that was a good message to have, together with the kind of applied research that I get up to sometimes, or most of the time, I guess it's mostly applied research that I'm doing. And I thought that was just a really great message for us to have today.